Good morning, all. I'm Felicia Schwartz. I'm Politico's diplomatic correspondent covering international security, defense, and trade. Here with me today is Congressman Mike Lawler of New York. He was named the most effective member in the 118th Congress and now serves as chair of the Middle East and North Africa Subcommittee in the House Foreign Affairs Committee. But maybe most importantly, he represents the district that I grew up in. So welcome, Congressman. Great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with President Trump's trip to the Middle East. You've expressed reservations about the administration's efforts to reach a nuclear deal with Iran. Trump this morning said the deal is very close. Do you think that the administration can get to a deal with Iran that doesn't allow them to enrich?
I think it's paramount that any agreement does not allow them to enrich uranium. Obviously, we don't want to see a JCPOA 2.0. That was a disaster, and President Trump was right to pull out of that and oppose it. Iran is the greatest threat to peace and stability in the Middle East. That's why I have fought so vociferously with respect to sanctions against the illicit oil trade between China and Iran. We passed the SHIP Act and the Iran-China Energy Sanctions Act last year. I've introduced the Enhanced Iran Sanctions Act bill this year, which we've already marked up. Cutting off that oil trade is paramount to cutting off the funding for their nuclear ambitions, their ballistic missiles program, and of course the funding of Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and other terror proxies. If you look at the situation, the administration has been very aggressively seeking to cut off their funding, impose the sanctions, use the SHIP Act and other tools to do so. Obviously, the president's objective is to ensure that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon. And you always want to try to use diplomatic means to avoid any use of military force. But the reality is, from my perspective, we need to be prepared in the event that a clear and unequivocal agreement cannot be reached to act. And if there is going to be an agreement, it cannot allow any enrichment of uranium.
When you say to act, do you mean to impose more sanctions, as you said, or perhaps to support an Israeli attack on Iran's nuclear?
My view is that this is not something that should be left to Israel alone. I think the United States needs to be prepared to take action militarily against Iran's nuclear program. Presidents in both parties and members of both parties in Congress have made clear for decades that Iran cannot have a nuke, yet they are closer today because of the failure of the Biden administration than at any point ever to having a nuclear weapon. And so it is paramount to prevent that. And if that requires military action because of the lack of an agreement and an enforceable agreement, then we need to be prepared to take action. I don't think that's something that should be left solely to Israel.
And before we pivot to other parts of the Middle East, I'll just ask you, how long do you think the administration has to see this process through before people like yourself will agitate for some other course of action?
I don't know that it said agitate, but look, I think obviously the president, when he sent a letter, talked about 60 days. Yeah. We are in a precarious place around the globe. You see the tensions flaring up. Obviously, we still have the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. You saw Pakistan and India tensions flare up last week. You have to deal with this aggressively and cannot let it linger. So we're not talking a very long time here.
While in Saudi Arabia earlier in the trip, President Trump made a surprise announcement that he wants to lift all sanctions on Syria. Do you support this, and what role does Congress have to play here?
So I think when you look at what has happened in the Middle East since October 7th, obviously Hamas and Hezbollah have been largely decimated. Assad's regime fell. Iran is in a weakened state with their air defenses knocked out. There is real opportunity in the Middle East. and an opportunity for, frankly, a seismic shift. Obviously, as President Reagan used to say, trust but verify. I think the objective diplomatically is to try and bring about peace and normalization between Arab states and Israel, starting with Saudi Arabia. If Syria presents an opportunity under this new leadership, and there's certainly concerns about the president there, but if Syria presents an opportunity, then certainly diplomatically we should try to get there. Same with Lebanon. But this is a work in progress. It is certainly not going to happen overnight. But I do think they're coming out of October 7th. There is certainly a greater appetite, I think, within the Arab states for more stability and more peace in the region. Obviously, economic ties help foster that. That's why the president's trip to Saudi Arabia was critical. But this is a long-term proposition that is going to take time to work through. But I fundamentally believe that there is greater opportunity today than there was prior to October 7th.
And any role for Congress as these sanctions come off?
Oh, of course. Look, as chair of the Middle East and North Africa subcommittee, this is paramount importance. We're going to be having a hearing soon on Syria. And, as I look at my priorities within Congress when it comes to the Middle East, obviously getting all of the hostages released and eliminating the threat from Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis are paramount. Containing the threat from Iran, ending the illicit oil trade, normalizing relations between Arab states and Israel, starting with Saudi Arabia, working through the dynamics in Lebanon and Syria and Iraq are important. And frankly, holding some of our allies, like Egypt, Turkey, and Qatar, accountable and making sure that they understand they have to pick a side. You can't play all sides.
Who do you think would be first to normalize with Israel, Saudi Arabia or Syria?
Saudi Arabia.
And just one more on Saudi. President Trump announced an $142 billion weapons deal while he was there. Have you been briefed on the specifics? And do you think a partner like Saudi Arabia should get F-35s?
We have not yet been briefed on all the specifics of it. Obviously, we are going to want more information as the president returns back from the trip. But look, Saudi Arabia and India are the two countries that I think are most vital to U.S. interests over the next decade when it comes to bringing about peace and prosperity around the globe. If you look at the threats from China, Iran, Russia, North Korea, and the unholy alliance that they have formed, Saudi Arabia and India are paramount. And strengthening the economic relationships between the U.S. and those two countries, strengthening the military relationships between those two countries is paramount. We don't want India, for instance, continuing to buy weapons from Russia. We obviously want to end the illicit oil trade between China and Iran. We don't want Iran sending drones to Russia. There's a lot of moving parts here, but if you want stability, you need to have stronger ties with some of our partners, and that requires greater military cooperation as well.
And on this question of the F-35 specifically, there have been several reports that the U.S. and Saudi Arabia are talking about this. I wonder if providing this capability undermines American assurances to Israel about maintaining its qualitative military edge.
Look, I think these are discussions that are part of a larger conversation, inclusive of normalizing relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, which I think is paramount when you talk about the Abraham Accords, when you talk about long-term peace. A lot of, frankly, the adversaries of Israel are adversaries of Saudi Arabia too, including Iran. So There's a lot of moving pieces here. I think obviously the relationship between the U.S. and Israel is paramount, but we want to normalize relations with our Arab partners in Israel as well. And so some of this is a negotiation, but it's also recognizing the need for a larger cooperation throughout the region.
I think a key piece of any normalization deal would be a ceasefire in Gaza. And after months of attempts by the Trump administration, after the ceasefire deal fell apart, I wonder how much closer you think we are to a resolution of the conflict or some sort of deal.
Well, I think obviously Idan Alexander being released was important. We still have 4 Americans who are deceased, whose bodies are being held. They all need to come home. And I think obviously the release of all remaining hostages is paramount to any ceasefire agreement. I think obviously had Netanyahu listened to Biden and Blinken and Sullivan, frankly, we would not be in this position. The fact is, if they did not go into Rafah, Sinwar would still be alive. If they did not go into Lebanon, Nasrallah would still be alive. And frankly, Assad would likely still be in charge in Syria. So we're in a much better position today, I think, to get to a ceasefire agreement than we were a year ago. But the hostages are non-negotiable. They need to be released. And obviously the threats posed by any of these terror proxies of Iran need to be eliminated. And as part of any agreement with Iran, their funding of these proxies needs to stop.
Do you think there's been much written, particularly in the Israeli press, but also over here, about the relationship between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu? Do you see any sort of rift, and do you think that Netanyahu actually does have an interest in ending the war?
No, I don't see a rift. At the end of the day, there's always going to be, diplomatic differences, and you work through them. The bottom line is the relationship between the United States and Israel is unbreakable, and frankly, President Trump has been arguably the greatest president for the state of Israel during his first and now second term. And I don't see the level of differences or disagreement that some of the press try to provoke.
And I want to ask you about President Trump's reconfigured national security team. You have a dual-hatted Secretary Rubio and National Security Advisor Rubio. And you have, of course, Steve Witkoff, who's taking on many of the most sensitive diplomatic files in your corner. Do these gentlemen have time to handle all of these responsibilities? And how will you know that they're juggling these responsibilities effectively?
Look, I think Secretary Rubio obviously has deep experience when it comes to foreign affairs. I think he's extremely intelligent, articulate, and certainly capable of handling multiple roles that are interconnected and critical. When it comes to something like USAID, the fact is it always should have been under the umbrella of state. So that in and of itself is to me, not really an issue. Look, both of them I think are doing a very good job managing these crises that are happening around the globe. The fact that we were able to broker a ceasefire agreement in a very short period of time between India and Pakistan, I think speaks volumes to Secretary Rubio and the President, the Vice President, and their ability to deal directly with world leaders and to do so in a very firm manner. I think obviously the challenges in the Middle East continue to persist, but you saw the threat from the Houthis, and basically were able to bring that to heal through a sustained campaign by DOD and obviously the diplomatic pressures applied. I think Steve Witkoff, has done a great job really when it comes to trying to get these hostages released. And, for somebody who's obviously not necessarily from this space, obviously I think he is doing very well in a very short period of time, and, is committed to the job. And I think they are committed to trying to bring these conflicts to an end and bring about more peace and stability, and do so in a very direct manner, which I think is effective.
Well, that is all the time we have. So thank you very much, Congressman, for joining us. And we'll look forward to seeing which way the Iran file goes.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
With NASA, I'm always interested in what their budget is. I'm always interested in what technologies they're pursuing. Try not to be redundant. If they're developing capabilities there that we can take advantage of, that's less R&D that I have to put in place. And so it's a very tight relationship in terms of how we interact with the industrial base.
And the White House is also bringing back the National Space Council, which in the first Trump administration was pretty key to standing up the Space Force. What sort of hopes do you have for your relationship with the council? How will that work? And perhaps the thing that comes to my mind is their role in coordinating Golden Dome might be pretty key.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything official yet, so you're the reporter here on this one. But what I will tell you is that anytime we elevate the national discussion on space, whether it's commercial, civil, or for national security purposes, I think that's a benefit. There is no question that space is a critical national interest. And I mean that from an economic standpoint, from a diplomatic standpoint, from information sharing, transparency, basic democratic values. Space is tremendously important. And I haven't even said national security, which is my business to make sure we use space effectively for that. So the value that space brings, it is a critical national interest. Any organization, mechanism, narrative that elevates that discussion to our most senior levels, whether it's Capitol Hill, whether it's in the executive branch, that's a powerful thing. And so I always support those kinds of efforts. We always have to keep the discussion in mind at the highest levels.
And on sort of the biggest national security space issue of the day is Golden Dome. What that will look like, how much it will cost. What is the next phase? What is the next target for you in terms of figuring out what that looks like?
We're still in the early planning of it, trying to think about it at the high level. It's a system of systems. It's not, you don't buy Golden Dome. You orchestrate a program that includes a lot of programs that you have to stitch together in very technical ways. And so it's a system of systems. Well, which systems are critical, which ones are in, which ones are affordable, which ones are practical in terms of the technology we can rapidly bring to bear. This is the analysis that's going on now at a high level. We'll put a basic plan together. We'll submit it to the Secretary of Defense. Secretary of Defense will take it to the White House, and we'll either be moving out or adjustments will be made, et cetera. So that's where we are, is in that basic planning to say, given the threat scenarios that we think you're trying to defend against, here are the systems that we think are appropriate. Here's the technology that's available, et cetera. Here's our plan and how we would proceed. And we're in that planning phase.
And agreed on the planning phase. There is that, I think it's almost $500 billion estimate from the Congressional Budget Office. Does that feel high to you, or does that feel like within the range of what might be spent given certain?
I'm 34 years in this business. I've never seen an early estimate that was too high. It's the nature of the business, I think, that we don't always understand the full level of complexity until you're actually in execution, doing the detailed planning. And so my gut tells me there's going to be some additional funding that's necessary. So yeah, there's always sticker shock, because space and these kinds of capabilities are exquisite. They are unique in the sense that there's not a lot of market that would drive the cost down. And so, yes, there is sticker shock, but it doesn't surprise me.
Well, I think we have to leave it there, unfortunately. Thank you so much for your time and insight. We hope everyone will join us soon. Come check out in the breakout session. I'll have a session with former NASA Administrator Bill Nelson. We'll be talking a little bit about the NASA budget stuff I brought up. Should be a very interesting conversation. It's for Pro subscribers only, but if you'd like to come and you're not a Pro subscriber, just find us in the break room and let us know. That about covers it. We'll have a brief video from our sponsors at RTX, and thank you all again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.